Just to remind you that Tyfu Cymru offers 100% funded support, advice, training, workshops, study tours, etc. So if there's something that you need and you want for your business, and we're not running it as a workshop already, then please get in touch and we can offer you one-to-one advice and support, whether that be with an agronomist or something else. If it's linked to digital support for your business or anything like that, please do get in touch either with Tyfu Cymru colleagues or with me, and we can sort that for you. Those resources are in place and we want to use them, so please do. We're going to record this session. It will go on to the Tyfu Cymru Knowledge Hub, and it means that you can watch at your leisure at a later date or signpost any of your friends and colleagues to it too. So that's on the Tyfu Cymru website too. We've got a calendar of events, which obviously originally would have been face-to-face. But because of the obviously COVID situation, we've all ended up in boxes on a screen, which in some ways is not such a bad thing. It means that we've been able to have people like Georgie speak without having to travel miles, and so we're really pleased to have her with us. You will have read something about Common Farm Flowers, but Georgie's been running it and is the founder and has been there for 10 years. So is a wealth of experience, and we're absolutely delighted to have her with us this evening. She's going to go through the Flower Farmers Year, and my understanding is that her planning is very strict, so we all need to have our diaries open and be ready to take on board and understand what Georgie's telling us. So without further ado, thank you, Georgie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And I love doing these Zoom sessions. We have been doing quite a lot of Zoom workshops here ourselves, and it's a great way to meet people from really all over. I've had people from Australia and New Zealand, which is really great because I would never have them normally here. So let me introduce myself. My name is Georgie Newbery, and we have been running Common Farm Flowers here in Somerset for 10 and a half years. Anybody who grows flowers for a living practically counts the days. Every day you survive for another day is a great success. So 10 and a half years we've been here, and we started because I had tiny children, and my husband and I had bought this falling down Victorian farmhouse with a 7-acre plot, and we had thought we would be some kind of market gardener. I think we were fantasy land, John Seymour fantasy type stuff. We thought there'd be pigs and sheep and chickens and vegetables, and flowers didn't even cross my mind. The pigs we loved, but they got too big. And we couldn't bear to send them to slaughter. The chickens were eaten by the fox every time we had chickens. The sheep were great friends and stayed here and became our pets, so they were hopeless. But I found I loved growing flowers, and it was only when it never occurred to me that I could sell them. And it was only when a neighbour sent me a bunch of flowers through the post, when the children were really tiny, and I opened this box of flowers, and it was an absolute light bulb moment. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I can grow flowers here. I can send them. I don't have to go anywhere with my tiny children underfoot. I'm going to send my flowers by courier to my customers. And so, while I had already been selling sort of bunches of sweet peas at the gate, we had a farm shop at the end of the lane, and so we had quite good passing trade in those days. The farm shop's now moved, and so we have no passing trade at all. But in those days it was quite good. But I opened this box of flowers and I thought, this is it. I know I can make a living doing this. And I knew, because I had been gardening, that I could do it in 20-minute increments. And at the time, I had a 3-year-old and a baby girl. And so from that standing start, without any planning at all, which now I look back at it, I think it's astonishing that we achieved anything, really. I have become, 10 years down the line, almost obsessive compulsive about my systems and my strategies and my planning. And so that's a bit what I'm going to talk about today. We now have gone from selling sweet peas in a barrow at the front of the house. We now do about 2,000 bouquets a year by courier through most of the UK. Bouquets and Christmas wreaths, which I haven't started making yet, but I will in a minute. And normally we do flowers for between 50 and 60 events a year. Obviously, practically none this year. And we teach, which is the bit I really, really love. I love to tell people how we've done it, because if we can do it, then anybody can do it. And I'm a really strong believer that with really ruthless organisation, then anybody can grow flowers. I don't think gardening is difficult. I don't think growing flowers is difficult. I think that's something you can learn. You can go and do RHS qualifications, or just get a border fork into the ground and start learning on the job. And the same with floristry. You can learn the floristry, but I think the thing that makes a business like this one successful for me, the only way that I can manage it is by being really, really strict with my diary. So I have permanently on the go a year planner. And you won't be able to, annoyingly, I realise that on Zoom, the year planner is absolutely hopeless. You can't, because the writing's the wrong way around. However, you get the idea. And I'm going to tell you the sorts of things that's on it. And I'm sure a lot of you have families and quite, don't fall over, and quite complicated lives. And the only way that I can manage it is if I have a year planner on the go at all times, and I actually have next year's already going. This goes through till next August, and then I've already got the one for the year after on the go. Because if I don't put in things like family birthdays and holidays and things, then I never get a day off. Because as all of you who work from home and grow vegetables, flowers, whatever it is, know that if you're at home, you never stop. The chores never stop. And so the first thing I do when I get my year planner is put the family birthdays in, and the school terms, the school holidays. And if I know in advance, like we're always away the first week of September, end of story, always. So I can put a line through that. I know we're going to be not around to do hundreds of weddings on that first week of September. And so I work like that. And then immediately you begin to see a pattern to the year. And if I can begin to see a pattern to the year, then I can start pacing myself, because it's not just, for me, it's not just about making sure that I've got a crop to cut. It's also making sure that I can stop and put my feet up at some point. Otherwise, by the end of the year, I have no skin on my hands. And this is a job which you will all know is one that you can just never, ever end. So if I put the important jobs in the diary, then they get done. I know how long they'll take. So some of them take 2 days, and that's 2 days in the diary. But then if somebody rings me up and says, let's go to London to see the Artemisia gentileschi exhibition, which I would really like to do, when can you go? I can look at my year planner and I can say, well, I will have planted my bare root roses on that date, so let's go on the next date. So in order to have my year functioning, and in order to be able to know that I can put my feet up occasionally and take the odd day off, I put all of my growing jobs onto the diary. And I can then also see when I've got time to do weddings, for example. I mean, the awful thing is, one, if I'm a grower florist, so I do all the floristry with all the product that I grow, and it could be possible to spend so much time doing the floristry that you haven't got time to do the growing. And I like to work on my own. It's I work very fast and I start very early in the morning, and it would be extremely unfair to try and have somebody help me, because they'd have to get here at 6 o'clock in the morning and keep up. And I'm a nightmare because my brain goes like this all the time. So it's much better if I work on my own. So if I have my basic growing days in the diary, then I can put the weddings in, and I can put the workshops in, and I can fill up the year so that I know almost for a year in advance pretty much what I'm doing. And then when people like you ring me up and invite me to give a talk, I can just glance at the board and see whether I'm free and I can do it. And that's an opportunity I can take an advantage of, because I know that I will have done all the gardening jobs that need doing. So what are those gardening jobs? Well, we aim to grow about 250,000 stems in a year. And I know that because I count the bouquets that I do, and I count the number of stems that go into the bouquets, and I know the balance of filler, foliage, and focal flowers that are in my bouquets. I do the fiddly end of flower farming in that I don't sell wholesale to somebody else. I sell direct to the end user. So I know I can, because I'm a control freak, it means I can control what they get, but it also means that they will get exactly what I grow. So I feel a bit sorry for my customers. They ring me up and say, can I ask for something or other, such and such? And I say, no, you can have what I've got, which is going to be this, that, and the other thing. But luckily people don't seem to mind that. And so if I'm growing 250,000 stems a year, and some of that gets cut in the winter, but most of it is cut in the summer. So some of it is the willow for the wreaths. I haven't started cutting yet, but I know I'm going to cut. I know I'm going to make 100 wreaths, and each wreath takes 9 stems. So I know I'm going to cut 900 stems. And I know that my wreaths will have 5 green stems, 2 black stems, and 2 orange stems. And so I know, so you see how I break things down really quickly so that I know exactly how many stems of everything that I'm going to be cutting. So if I'm going to grow about 250,000 stems in a year, most of my flowers, I aim to have a garden in full flower from the 1st of April to the 15th of November, which is a 30-week season. And that's really nice because you can divide 30 weeks into 5 times 6 weeks, which means that I can have 5 sessions of annuals flowering, because I don't think it's fair to ask annuals to flower, to be in really good quality and really good long stems for more than 6 weeks at a time. Annuals, as you all know, want to germinate, grow, flower, and go over as quickly as they possibly can. So to keep cutting them for 6 weeks is plenty. Then you've got to let them go, otherwise the stems get shorter and shorter and shorter, and the flowers get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they get less and less useful, and you're fighting to keep something going when you could have had another crop. So let's start in the autumn. My first annual crop for next year is sown in September. And actually I cheat because I have 2 polytunnels, and I can't cope with the heat in the polytunnels from about July onwards. So I let my crops go over and they seed themselves everywhere. And then in mid-September, and then I clear them. And then in mid-September, I water the tunnels, and up come thousands of seedlings. And that's my first crop. So I move the seedlings. I don't just leave them to be a jungle of seedlings. I corral my seedlings into blocks of larkspur, Ami major, Chinese forget-me-nots, wild carrot, clary sage, and so on. And that's my first crop of annuals, already in the tunnel, coming along nicely. And and this goes in the diary so that I know that I'm going to do this. So I water the tunnel, it goes in the diary, on the 15th of September. Water the tunnel for an hour. And then it'll probably take another water, and then suddenly there'll be seedlings everywhere. And then about 10 days later, I've got thousands of seedlings, which I can then rearrange into blocks. So that's very helpful. I then sow my first set of sweet peas for the following spring. So that happens on the 1st of October, and it's in the diary, the 1st of October. If you call me and say, can you have lunch on the 1st of October? The answer is no, but I can have lunch on the 31st of September or the 2nd of October. That's fine. It's not that I'm stopping myself doing anything. It's just I'm making sure that the really important jobs are getting done. So the sweet peas are sown, and I sow 3 crops of 90 sweet peas at a time. So in a season, I'll have 270 sweet pea plants, which is plenty, I think. And I plant them. I'll plant them out. So they are now currently in my greenhouse, which is cold greenhouse. I don't have any heating in my greenhouse, and they're all pretty much ready to be planted out. And I will plant them out probably in the next week or 2, but it is in the diary, just in case I don't actually do it. Then they are actually shouting at me in my ear, plant me out, plant me out. But it's in the diary for the 1st of December to plant the sweet peas into the tunnel. And this year they're going into the small tunnel, and I use my sweet peas to drive a rotation all around the plot. And so this first crop is going into the small tunnel this year because it's 3 years since they've been in there. So that's fine. And then next year they're going to the big tunnel on one side of it. And the year after that, they'll go in the big tunnel on the other side of it. And they will start flowering from the first mid-April. I'll be getting a crop off them. And they will flower from mid-April until end of June, beginning of July. But meanwhile, my second crop of sweet peas is sown without fail, without any argument, on the 15th of February, which is also a day that is sacred in my diary because I sow an enormous number of seeds on the 15th of February. So my first annual crop is in the tunnel already, and my second annual crop is basically sown on the 15th of February, and it will be planted out around the end of March, but it is in the diary that it will be planted out so that it happens. Otherwise, obviously, if it's a sharp frost, I won't do it. But I fleece the ground so that it's ready for it, and I'll try and get everything into the ground. And then that second annual's crop will flower from end of June, beginning of July, through into August. And then I'll sow my third annual's crop direct in the ground mid-April, and next year April is something like Easter is something like the 4th of April. It's very early, so it'll be well after that. The children probably will have gone back to school and everything, but I know that I'm going to do that. So so far I've got 3 annuals crops, and I will do a 4th, and I will sow end of May, beginning of June. I will be filling up gaps by that stage with zinnias, cosmos, amaranthus. I have a pash for amaranthus. Bells of Ireland are great for an end of season. That sort of thing. Maybe a late crop of Ami Bisnaga. It depends what seed I've got left. But I know that towards the end of May, beginning of June, I will be sowing that crop direct in the soil. And so that gives me a constant run from April to the first frosts of good annuals, all my filler, which I need to have about a third of the garden. Once I've got the garden in full flower, I want about a third of it to be filler at any one time, and a third of it to be accent flowers, and a third of it to be greenery. So the accent flowers, what are the accent flowers? Well, ranunculus, okay, in the diary, that the ranunculus are delivered they were delivered mid-October, and they were soaked overnight in buckets of water. I sprouted them in module trays, covered, not especially because they needed warmth, but because otherwise the mice will eat them. So I sprout them till they're a good size, and they have also been planted out now into the tunnel. So I make sure that those days are in, because the ranunculus are worth their weight in gold. I mean, if you're a flower farmer and you're not going to be doing the fiddly stuff like me, like making whole bouquets, so you need all this, or you need all the annuals that are to be your filler, I would say grow ranunculus, because you can sell them for a premium. They are the roses of the early spring. So my ranunculus are already in the tunnel, along with some anemones, which equally, they give you an accent flower for the early season. And then I have, in the diary, I order my tulips really, really early. And I happen to know that the Peter Nyson list comes out sort of at the end of May. So I have in the diary on the 2nd or 3rd of June, I order my tulips. Partly because I don't want to miss out on the ones I want, but also because my tulips are still really fresh in my mind, and I know which ones I've really enjoyed and what the colours I've liked and what I didn't like and what I don't want to do again. And because I know how many bouquets I sold and how many tulips went into each bouquet, and they flower over pretty much an 8-week period, starting, depending on the spring, mid to the end of March, and then they go through to mid-May. So I have got 4,500 tulips coming, but they haven't arrived yet. And the reason they haven't arrived yet is because I asked lovely Karen at Peter Nyson not to deliver them until the week of the 16th of November, which means that I've had time to get the bed sorted out. So in the diary for this week was prep the tulip beds. So they are ready. And now the tulips can arrive on Monday or Tuesday. And we will get them in the ground. My husband and I will get them in the ground next Friday. And that's in the diary. I'm not doing anything else. Well, I mean, it's lockdown, so I'm really not doing anything else next Friday. But if it were a normal time, there might be temptations to do other exciting things next Friday, but then the tulips might not be planted. So my tulips and my ranunculus are my first accent flowers. I then hope that I don't have too much of a gap before the roses start flowering, because I do have some peonies, but they take, the thing for me, peonies take a lot of space. They're valuable, but they take up a lot of space, and they will flower for a fortnight, but somewhere in about a 6-week period. You just don't know when they're going to flower. So for me, that's quite a lot of space to take for something that may be flowering at the same time as the roses, or maybe flowering at the same time as the ranunculus and the tulips. And I'd rather, so I'm not sure I can afford that space. And what I don't want to be doing ever is cutting more than I need. If I've got, and I don't want to be walking too far. So I would rather have everything flowering in the same place. So I want all my tulips. So I'm just going to the tulips and back to pick up what the tulips I need for that day. If I'm then fiddling around going to cut peonies as well, it's a waste of time. It's slowing me down. And when I'm cutting, I aim to cut about 400 stems an hour. So I try and have everything laid out close together. So peonies are a bit of a, I have actually put some in and they haven't flowered yet, but we'll see whether I actually use them. And if I don't use them, I'll get rid of them. And if I don't use them, it'll be because they're inconvenient and I've got my tulips coming, so I'll use the tulips. So in between tulips and roses, actually, I do have lots of alliums and Dutch iris, which I really love and which make a really nice mix in that gap. And the ranunculus and the tunnel will carry on through, so they'll give me a bit more right up until the roses start flowering. And I don't always put new roses in, but this winter I am going to put in another 100. It always depends on your budget and cash flow and how much of a battering you took given your old roses and they need a refresher, and whether you're fed up with the colours and you want something new. So this year I have got 100 roses. I haven't quite ordered them yet because of the cash flow situation. But I will have them. And again, the fact that I need to order those roses is in the diary, and I need to order them before the end of November because I won't have time in December because of Christmas. It's all the wreaths. It's a huge business for us, the wreath business. So because I won't have any time, I really need to get those roses ordered before the end of November. And I have also put that I'm going to plant them at the end of January, and that's in the diary again, plus the week before to get the ground ready, because it's so easy to order new plants but forget to prep the ground. So they arrive, and then you start prepping the ground, and they're sitting there quietly rotting or freezing or whatever, you know. Taking the sooner you get a bare root, if you've ordered in bare root stock, you want to get it into the ground as quickly as possible, and then it'll do the best for you. So those dates go into the diary. And the other date that is in my diary, and I have yet to look at them, is if I want to order any more dahlias, because after the roses, so the roses give me accent flowers for June and July, and then they may or may not carry on. But frankly, for me, the great love of my life is my dahlia patch. And as soon as the dahlias stop flowering, I ignore the roses, I just abandon them. I'm not interested, really. I just love the dahlias. So in the diary has been lifting the dahlias, and normally I don't lift them all. Normally I just lift one or two each of my favorites, so that I have a little heap of them in the office, which is freezing cold. I never heat it. Faces north, has a concrete floor, and no mice. So it's the perfect place to store a dahlia over the winter. But this year, I've had a tiny bit of virus in my dahlias. Just, I mean, like a tiny bit. And it's just tiny, and they've been in the same place for 7 years. And it's just crept along a tiny bit and a tiny bit. And this year, I just felt as though it was time to really lift them all and have a real session sorting them out. So this weekend, I will finish lifting them all. And I am only keeping some of them. I've kept 50. But those 50, when I come to splitting them, and it's in the diary, on the 1st of April, I split my dahlias. They will make probably 10 plants each. So that'll give me 500 dahlias, which is plenty for me, really, I think. But I have got in the diary the fact that I might want to order, just have a look and see if there are any more. I may have a little list that I've been making over the summer, looking at other people's dahlias and things that I thought were attractive. So I may order a few more, but I must remember to order them before the end of November, because otherwise they'll have sold out. Other people will have bought them, and they won't be any of the ones that I particularly like the look of. So I must remember to order those, and that's in the diary. But I tell my supplier not to deliver the dahlia, and I tend to, I'm not lazy, I just tend to order them as small plants rather than tubers, and then I see how they do for a year, and then I'll split them if I like them. So I will tell my supplier that I don't want those dahlias to be delivered until mid-April, beginning of May, because I haven't got room for them, I haven't got time for them, I don't want to deal with them. When they do arrive, then I can make sure that I've got time to pot them up and bring them on a bit before I plant them out. So another date for the dahlias, really, really important date, is the dahlia splitting day, which is the 1st of April for me. Other people start propagating their dahlias months before, but I don't have heated beds, I don't have the frost protection, and actually I think they catch up. I mean, it's not very sophisticated or horticultural way to split dahlias, but I'll bring they're huge, a big dahlia clump, and I'll bring them in here one at a time. And I'm afraid I use a very good glove and a carving knife, and I just chop them up. It's not a very sophisticated way to do it. I get rid of as much of last year's stem as I can, because that's where the virus sort of lurks. I can, by the 1st of April, you can see not just eyes, you can see little moonstones of proto shoots. So you can really make sure that you're planting a good bit of dahlia, you're going to get a good plant. And I'll pot them all up on the 1st of April, and they'll go into the tunnel where they'll grow on, and they go down the paths in the tunnel between the ranunculus, which by then is in full flower, the anemones, which are in full flower, and all those annuals that I was talking about, which are already kind of knee height and coming along quite nicely. So they will go in there, but I have to remember in the diary to order enough compost to put them up in, because 500 dahlias take a fair bit of compost. And I think I spend money in odd places, and I'm sure all of us have kind of strange peccadillos about where we spend our money, but I like to pot up in, if I'm using my dahlias, I'll pot up in a mix of silver grow, Melcourt silver grow, which is a really lovely 5-star peat-free compost, really smarty pants, delicious, really gorgeous. And I will mix it with Lakeland Gold, which is also extremely smarty pants and expensive. But having used both of those products for the last couple of years, I think they've saved me thousands of pounds in time, watering, feeding, and losing things because the compost wasn't any good. So I'd rather just throw a bit of money at good quality compost, and then I know I'm going to get good quality plants, and it'll save me time. So the dahlias are sorted, and you sort of see their year. So I've got to keep an eye on the time. My accent flowers are ranunculus, tulips, roses and dahlias. They keep me going through the summer, and they have their year. Each of them have their year. Oh yeah, the roses, I prune my roses in November. I haven't done it yet. Tick tock, tick tock. But as soon as I got the tulips in next week, the next job, so I've got to finish lifting the dahlias, get the tulips in, and then the last job really before the winter is to prune the roses. And we're not gardening. None of you are gardening either. We are flower farming, and so I do things probably slightly differently to a traditional horticulturalist, who might give their roses a light prune in November to prevent them being blown around in the wind, and then prune them properly in February. I prune them properly in November, because why do a job twice? And if I prune them in November, they'll flower earlier than if I prune them again in February. So I will prune them really hard, really, really hard. I mean, they'll end up with a sort of 10-inch stem, and you'll end up with, each rose will be about 3 stem. I mean, they'll look as if I've just put them in the ground, and I mulch them really heavily with Dalefoot compost now. So I'll give them a prune, a weed, rake all the weeds away, give them a good mulch, and they'll be really, really good nick for the spring. So those are my 3 accent flowers. I've got plenty of annual crops to take me through the season. And then my third of my garden, I do everything by cutting things into 3s. So I've got a third accent flowers, a third filler and foliage, a third filler, and my third thing is my foliage. And you may think that doesn't need much looking after, but actually, in the same way that the roses need pruning, all the foliage plants, all my shrubs need mulching. So the mulching doesn't go in the diary as a kind of one-day job, because it takes all winter. But what does go in the diary is ordering the mulch. And I can hear you thinking, but don't they make their own compost? And the answer is, we do, but we are also incredibly green. And my husband has a great ethos, which I completely buy into. And his line is, look after the invertebrates and the rest of the food chain will look after itself. Which means that, while we have heaps of horticultural debris all over the garden, we never properly make compost, because every time I go, oh, darling, shall we toss that compost over and make it into a really lovely compost? And he says, no, because there is a grass snake living in it, or there's a hedgehog living in it, or somebody's living in it, and we can't disturb them. So I buy compost. So if I'm going to mulch, when I'm going to mulch everything, I have to put my compost budget into my budget and make sure that I order it. And I tend to buy very big bags of compost in August. And the reason I buy it in August is not only because generally in August I'm feeling a bit flush after a good season, but you get more for your money because it's drier. So you buy compost by the weight, and if you're buying several tons, you'll get more in your several tons if you make sure that you've bought it in August. So I put that in the diary. At the beginning of August, I have to remember to order compost to take me through my mulching season. And the awful thing is we've rearranged our beds, and so I haven't got enough. I'm going to have to order some more, never mind. But we'll get there. So I then have other things that go in the diary, like watering, which I don't know about you guys in Wales, but here in Somerset, which was the wettest place in the world, and our farm is called Common Farm because it was common land, and it was the worst land in the village, and basically it was a marsh. Even when we came here 17 years ago, it was a marsh. And we planted the willow, which we now crop for our Christmas wreaths, to help drain the marsh. And it really worked, largely because it stopped raining. And so we water, sorry, something's happening in my computer. There we go, I'm back. So I have a watering schedule, which I put in the diary, and I don't necessarily do it if it's been very wet, I don't do it. But I have found in the last couple of years that we've had very dry springs. So it's really wet now, but it is possible that by April, and sometimes in April it's really hot and dry, which is rubbish for tulips. And so I now have a day in March, early March, about two weeks to a month before I think they're going to flower, and I water the tulips, because 4,500 tulips cost me over £1,000. And if they're very dry, they'll shoot and you'll get the tulip heads and then they just snap off. They're fragile. And I can't afford, that's a waste of time, money, effort. And then I have nothing to put in my bouquets either. So it's really worth that water. And I also, depending on how dry it is, I will have it in the diary just to check if the ground is very dry in May. I will water in May, because the shrubs will hate it. They will just, my shrubs really don't like it when it's very dry. My Physocarpus, which is my absolutely fail-safe, reliable foliage that I use from May till August, and I've got probably about 12 plants that I just hammer. I'll take 200 or 300 stems a week off them, and they're fine. They just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. They must be a nightmare if you don't cut them. But if they haven't had enough water, they'll just sulk. So, and the leaves look dry. So I really water, not just quick squirt. I mean, I'll really put the leaky hose on them for quite a long time in May. I remember one year I lost all the buds off my Philadelphus because it was so dry. And I just can't afford to do that. But if I find that if I really water like that in May, I don't have to water again. It just sort of fills them up. And I'll do the same with my roses. If they're looking if it's very dry and they're just trying to bud up, then it's really worth giving them an absolute drenching. And if the mulch that they've had over the winter has sort of disappeared into the ground, you can always drench and then remulch over the top to stop the water evaporating. It really protects them over the summer, and it makes a huge difference, I have found. And then on the 1st of June, I plant out those lovely dahlias. Actually, the 15th of May, they come out of the tunnel and get hardened off in my cold frames. And on the 1st of June, they get planted into the garden. Whatever happens, that's what I'm doing on the 1st of June. And they will be really, really well watered in. And again, I will mulch them having watered them, and I will mulch them with the Lakeland Gold, which costs a fortune. But this year, my dahlias were mulched with Lakeland Gold. And once I had watered them in, once I planted them out and watered them in, and I think I watered them the following weekend and the following weekend, I did not water them again. And I didn't feed them once this year. And they were the best dahlias I've ever had. And I've had good dahlias for years. I love my dahlias. So again, I think it's really worth spending money on really good, rich compost, because if you're not then having to fiddle around watering and feeding, you're saving yourself an enormous amount of time. And I'm assuming, because that's how it worked this year, that next year I won't have to feed either. So although I'm moving my dahlias completely, and the annuals are going to go in the patch where the dahlias were, and the dahlias are going to go in the patch where the annuals were, I will run them exactly the same way. There's one other thing that we haven't talked about yet, and we started talking about September, and of course, really the flower farmer's year, if you're the kind of flower farmer that I am, in that I grow filler, accent flowers and foliage, and I'm doing the floristry, of course there's a really major thing that needs sowing in June, and that's your biennials. And if you remember to sow your biennials, you have stolen a march on the following year. And they're valuable biennials, I think, but they're tall, they're good colour, they're sort of heavier than the annuals filler that you might have coming along at the same time. So your foxgloves, your sweet rocket, your wallflowers, your sweet William, and I love Canterbury bells and all those sorts of things. If you remember to sow them on or around the 15th of June, for me, it's in the diary, 15th of June, you can invite me to do all sorts of stuff. I'm sowing my biennials on the 15th of June. If you remember to sow them on the 15th of June, and then I germinate mine in the shade, I have a next to the tunnel, I have a sort of, it's like a kitchen surface height stretch of bench, and it's shaded with just that mesh, like builder's mesh. It's brilliant stuff. And they really happily germinate in that shade. At that time of year, quite often it's very hot, and your seeds can either refuse to germinate point blank, they'll just sit there refusing, or they'll germinate and then burn off. So it's a really good idea to germinate them in the shade. And so that date, the 15th of June, is sacred for me. And if I'm sowing any perennials for the following year, so I might be sowing a crop of, not larkspur, what are they called? Delphiniums, thank you. So if I'm sowing a crop of delphiniums, I'll sow them at the same time, because then I can look after them all together at the same time. So 15th of June is they're in the diary to be done, and they will germinate and they will be all right. And I will be pricking them out at the beginning of July. And so I can make sure I've got the right amount. I quite often end up giving, foxglove seeds are so tiny that you end up with thousands of them. So I'm always giving them to the neighbours, because you don't need that many foxgloves. So, a full-grown foxglove is going to take up a great deal of space in your flower beds. So you don't need that many, but I will have them ready, and then I will be planting them out. And this year, very early, I think because of all the events didn't happen, I have found myself ahead of myself in the garden, because I've not been having to do wedding flowers. I've been free on Saturdays. It's like, I'll just plant my biennials out. We planted them out in August, which for us is very, very early. Normally I'd be planting them in September. And again, that date is in the diary to plant them in September, but you're clearing beds then anyway. So you may as well put your biennials in, and they will then, you're growing plants instead of growing weeds. You don't want to have empty beds. And so that way you've really caught yourself up. I'm sorry about my dog. And there's one more thing that I'm going to mention before we go on to questions. And that is that while I have everything in the diary, and I constantly reassess the diary to make sure that I get everything done. If I don't have it in the diary, it doesn't happen. I forget, and I book to go to the Gentileschi exhibition, and the roses never get planted. So I have to put it in the diary. But it's really important. This is where you can get even more obsessive compulsive. But, you know, I feel like this is, as a flower farmer, this is the place I can indulge my obsessive compulsive nature. Count the amounts of plants that you're planting really carefully. And if you remember at the beginning, I said, I know how many stems I'm going to cut in a year because I know how many bouquets I sold last year. So I take last year's bouquets, I add 20%, in the hope that I'm going to raise my game a little bit. And I know stem by stem how many stems are going into a bouquet, which means because I ballpark know how many stems I can take off a plant, and I am not going to market. I'm not stalling out at a shop or at a farm shop or something. I want to grow exactly what I want to grow. So I'm really careful not to grow too many of anything. I count how many stems I think I'm going to get off an Ami Majus plant, for example. I think I'm going to get 5 stems off an Ami Majus plant a week for the 6 weeks it's flowering. And if I'm going to be making 30 bouquets a week while the Ami Majus is in full flower, and I'm going to put 5 stems of Ami Majus in each of those 30 bouquets, I'm going to need 30 plants. And so then I make sure that I'm sowing exactly the right amount of Ami Majus for my crop at that stage. And 30 plants, if I'm planting them, we have meter wide beds, and they go on for hundreds of meters. So I count my bed, how many meters of bed I've got to fill, and ballpark, I tend to end up planting 30 of everything at once. So of any crop that I'm going for, apart from sweet peas, which I'll have masses, I'll do 90 sweet peas. But most things like an Ami Majus, at any one time, I'll have 30 Ami Majus flowering. So that means that when I've got something diarised for sowing seeds or pricking out or whatever it is, I can make sure that I'm not overdoing it. And that way I don't end up with thousands of seedlings I don't need. And I don't end up with not enough either. So I'm afraid I have let you into my obsessive compulsive brain, which if you opened it up with an axe, I think it would just fold out like a giant spreadsheet. But I hope my talk has been useful, and I hope you perhaps are inspired to look at your ground and think, okay, I'm going to diarise my year, because then I will get a day to go to the Artemisia Gentileschi exhibition, and I will be able to take a week off, because I won't have booked a wedding or planting, or I will have achieved all my objectives, and I will be able to go to St. David's for a week, which is my dream. I apologise, my dog is whinging. I'm just going to let her out. Excuse me. Dog. Oh, sweet. Oh. Oh. So now, have we got any questions? I think, should everybody turn their sound back on? And if you have a question, would you mind waving?
There's a question come through the chat box from Ali.
Yes.
And she's asking, do you use perennial plants at all? And if so, what do you find useful?
We use masses of perennials, but I'm a bit wary not to use anything that takes up too much space, there's always a tension between how much I love something and how much space it takes up versus how many stems I can get off it. So, for example, I will always have quite a lot of Alchemilla mollis, which in season is absolutely fantastic, but I don't grow, and I think it would be really lovely cut. I don't grow thalictrum. I'm so tempted to grow thalictrum for a cut flower, but I don't, because I don't think you get enough bang for your buck off the flower. I think it's a beautiful garden plant, but I wouldn't grow it. I grow things which really work hard for me. So even trees, for example, I grow quite a lot of crabapple trees. And the reason I grow crabapple trees is threefold. One, great windbreak, so they can protect a patch. Two, wonderful blossom, best blossom. It's just amazing blossom, worth a lot of money. Three, fruit, which if you grow red sentinel, gives you bright red fruit that stays on the tree until Christmas. So that does my Christmas wreaths. So that's a really useful plant. Whereas this is why I'm a bit wary about my peonies, because I think to take up that much space but only flower for a fortnight is a bit greedy compared to my roses, which take up a fair bit of space but flower for 2 months, or my dahlias, which take up a fair bit of space but flower for 4 months without taking a break. So I do have lots of perennials. It's always a space question for perennials. But equally, for example, an orange geum, you don't need masses of orange geums to just give you that lick of, I love orange, and a little tiny bit of orange. You can have a very tasteful pink and white bouquet, and you just give it one orange geum and the whole thing is much, much better. So I do have lots of perennials as well as the annuals. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for that. Anne's asking, what are your favourite annuals?
I wouldn't be, and then I think this is a probably an important question, is not so much what are my favourite annuals, but what are the ones I wouldn't be without, whether I like them or not. I would not be without sweet peas. Well, I started the business because of sweet peas, and the scent of a sweet pea, it still knocks me for six. But also commercially, people want sweet peas. If I'm doing 50 or 60 weddings and events through a season, one of the things that I need a lot of, particularly for weddings, is sweet peas. So I wouldn't be without them. And I wouldn't be without lace. So I grow Ami majus and Ami visnaga and dill and bronze fennel, lots of umbellifers to be my lace through the season, because quite often people will say, oh, I like it when it's lacy, or they'll ask for cow parsley and their weddings in August. And I'm not going to say, no, you can't have cow parsley. It's not my job to sort of make the client feel small and uneducated. I just say, yes, I'll give you some lovely lace. And that's fine. Then I make sure that I have lace through the season all the time. And there are some things that I much prefer to a perennial version. For example, I love larkspur much more than I love delphiniums. Delphiniums are very heavy-headed, and that's fine if you're doing big, enormous church weddings, huge events, then they're really useful. But actually, my core business is bunches of flowers going out by courier. And so larkspur is a lighter version of a delphinium. So I will always grow larkspur. Does that answer the question? And
Alice is asking, I mean, you've touched on it a bit, but Alice is asking, what are your favourite plants for foliage?
For foliage? Oh my goodness. Okay, I have a foliage year. Do you want me to go through my foliage year? It's really important to have lots of foliage at all times. So I start the season in April with the foliage of my winter flowering honeysuckle. And you may think that winter flowering honeysuckle is because one grows it for its lovely scented flowers, but actually they're hopeless. You can't cut them. They're always badly bashed by the weather. They're brown. They're no good to anybody. However, the foliage in the spring is a really great zingy green, and it grows in hand shapes out of the stem. And so it's really, really useful. So that's my first foliage. Followed, that does sort of end of March, beginning of most of April. And then in May, along comes my Physocarpus. The Americans call it 9-bark. And it's wonderful because you can get a black one. Diablo's the most amazing dark aubergine, reddy, rusty colour. It's absolutely fantastic. And it grows like bilio, so long as the ground is moist enough. It won't like it if it's growing dry, doesn't like it where it's dry. That's rich soil. So the Diablo is the dark one, and Dark's Gold is the gold. It's a really good zingy green, zingy sort of lime green colour. So they're brilliant. They keep me through May, June and July. And then they get a bit tired. They just dry out a bit. And so in August, I grow a small leafed variegated cornus, the variety of which I could not tell you. I got these plants off somebody years ago, and it's absolutely brilliant. Cornus can be a bit floppy in the spring because you get these quite big leaves, and when it's new growth, they can be quite wilty. By August, the sap has pretty much stopped rising, and you've got these lovely, quite big variegated leaves and berries coming, really pretty. So that's my August and early September go-to foliage. And then I have my Cotinus, my smoke bush, which gives me September and October. And I grow Cotinus varieties with quite small leaves, again, because the bigger the leaf, the more it transpires and the more likely it is to flop. But Cotinus makes a really lovely smell when you cut it. It's not a woody smell, it's a sort of herby smell, really great. So a big fan of Cotinus for my autumn cutting. I wouldn't cut it in the spring because it'll flop. So that works quite well. Those are my basic essentials. And then I have quite a lot of Brachyglottis, which is spelled, does anybody want me to spell Brachyglottis? Well, Brachyglottis is a silvery leaf. And I think a bit of silver goes a very long way in floristry. Plus, it doesn't flop if you put it in flower crowns and buttonholes and Christmas wreaths. It's sort of a silvery, it's a really nice silvery colour. And the velvet in it, I think texture is really important, especially with foliage. So it's quite fun to do that. But I also sorry, I can bang on about foliage for years, but I'm a very big fan of rose foliage when it's not flowering. So I haven't cut it back yet, but I have a rose called Tuscany Superb. And her foliage is going a gorgeous sort of rusty red colour. And I will cut her next week and use her in my floristry. Is that enough? That long enough list?
Never enough. We've got a question from Sarah. Thanks, Sarah. Do you stick to bouquet recipes at different times to go with what's growing to keep a control on your numbers?
I do. I change what I grow every year. So I do, but I don't. I change what I grow every year, but I grow it in quantities which will do the same job. So as a rule, I don't say you must grow Ami and sweet peas and feverfew and I don't know, green Nicotiana lime green. What I say for my shape bouquets, what I'm always looking for is a daisy shape and a spike and some scent and some lace, and that's the way I work out the recipe, because I don't want to create bouquets that look like motorbike helmets you could knock somebody out with. I want to have lots of life, so I want grasses and I want spikes. So I will make sure that my season I have a daisy shape. So a daisy shape, for example, starts in the spring with an anemone, which is a daisy shape. And then I have wild daisies. And then I have feverfew. And then I have leucanthemums, the daisy cultivars. And then I have cosmos, which is still a daisy shape. And so when my clients ask for daisies, they're not asking for little short daisies that grow in the grass. They want that shape. And so I think it's a really comfortable shape. It stops the flowers looking too London. I don't want to look London. There's nothing wrong with looking London, but that's not where I'm coming from, Somerset. So I want a sort of wild and hairy look. So I will go for a shape, and I'll do the same with my favourite one is a paniculata shape. I have a passion for a paniculata shape. So I will make sure that I have paniculatas all the season, starting, for example, with Honesty is my first paniculata shape, followed by Sweet Rocket, Honesty, Lilac, Sweet Rocket, paniculata shaped hydrangeas, phlox before the hydrangeas. And that way you can have that paniculata shape all the way through the season, which I like in my bouquets. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question at all?
Yes, I think it does. So we've got no more questions in the chat box, but if anybody else wants to ask directly, they're very welcome. Don't be shy.
Silence.
I know. So you see, you've astounded us all.
I have this really bad habit. I talk so fast. I know I do this. I talk so fast that people kind of, at the end, people sort of sit there staring at me as if they've been blown over.
I mean, I have to say, on a personal level, I'm just blown away by the kind of amount of detail and the your organisation. It's just incredible, that kind of all that diary. I mean, I'm a diary planner, but not to that degree, actually. So most impressive.
Well, I think I just think the year is so fundamental to achieve. You know, my objective is to grow and cut a 250,000 stems a year, and I don't want to pay anybody else to do it. I want to do it. I really like working on my own, and so in order to achieve that objective on my own, I have to be super organized. Plus, I don't know about anybody else, but I don't like lying in bed worrying about whether I've done anything or whether I've got time. And I have I'm a bit old for it, I know, but I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. And in normal times, there are more things go in the diary, like, you know, the end of term concert and the carol service and all of these things. And unless I put those things in the diary and therefore put the flower farm round it, I have in the past missed the carol service because I hadn't been organised enough, and I hate it. And that made me feel like a really bad parent. So I don't want to feel like a bad parent. I want to be able to achieve it all. And the only way to do it is by planning like this. I mean, you should see my cash flow forecast. It is also quite obsessive compulsive. But again, if I don't have that, what happens is, you know, I don't know about all of you guys, but I sit on Instagram looking at what my competitors are doing, and I think, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing this. But actually, if you have an organised cash flow forecast based on what you can achieve within a 365-day period, and experience teaches you that cash flow forecast is probably going to work, even with COVID. I mean, God, that's astonishing that we're all sitting here. It's really amazing. And if I have that, then I have learned. I mean, this is not, you know, I'm the girl who was told she was bad at maths when she was 11, and thought that they'd given her someone else's results when they'd said that I'd passed my maths O level. So, but I now lie in bed watching my accounts on Zero on my phone. But that way, if I am, you know, increasingly controlling. And I think in some ways in this business, if one can control tightly the activity, then within the boundaries that one sets, one can be then very creative. And if that's where the fun is, isn't it? That's what I want to be, is I want to be free to be incredibly creative. And in order to be free to be very incredibly creative, I have to have a garden full of the right stuff all year round.
Well, talking about control, actually, we've had a question through about how do you control pests such as aphids and slugs?
I don't.
There you go.
We've been gardening for, we moved here in 2004, and when we came, the fields were thick ryegrass for feeding cattle, and on a wet day in the summer, you'd have a blade of grass bending over with the weight of 5 or 6 slugs on each blade of grass. It was absolutely disgusting. And it was a monoculture, a green desert when we arrived here. And it's a 7-acre plot, and half of it is cut flower patch, so about 3.5 acres cut flowers, and 3.5 acres are wild orchard, willow, band of trees around the edge, that sort of thing. And we have watched the wildlife, and therefore the food chain, expand to fit the space over the 14, 15 years. No, wait a minute, 2004, I can't do that, 16 years we've been here. To the extent, and this is a theory, I am no scientist, so this is a theory, but my theory is that the food chain is doubled in size every year. And so the first year we had terrible slugs. The second year we had terrible slugs. The third year we had slightly fewer slugs, but I was still losing, if I planted out a row of cornflowers, I could conceivably lose the whole row of cornflowers to slugs in one night. And then it was last year, so 2019, that there was an explosion of wildlife here. And I think what happens is you get 100% more wildlife every year, and suddenly it gets to the stage where 100% more is a lot of more. Mm. And we don't have slugs. I have slugs, but they're not going to do me any, I mean, they'll nibble, but they're not going to ruin anything. And we have aphids, and I slightly have to hold my breath because they hatch about a fortnight before the ladybirds. But I've got ladybirds coming out of my ears. And the best one of all of the natural control stories is the year, I think it was 3, possibly 4 years ago, my dahlias started flowering, and then they suddenly looked they were fine for like 2 weeks, and then suddenly they started to look dirty, and they looked really awful. They looked really ragged. They were grubby and nibbled and sort of tired, and not what they should have looked like as they began to flower. And I looked at them and I found that I had an infestation of thrip. But not just any old infestation of thrip. I mean, the most spectacular infestation of thrip. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Luckily, the roses were still flowering away, so I was using the roses. And I just was thinking, what shall I do? We garden organically. We don't have organic certification, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't do any intervention. I had to just wait to see what happened with the thrip. And then one day, my husband came back into the kitchen. He said, oh, be careful on the path going past the dahlias, because there's a wasp nest in the ground just on the side there. And you don't want to be eaten alive by those wasps. And I thought, oh, okay, never mind. Well, that's not a bad thing. Wasps are great tidier uppers in the garden. They're not a bad thing to have in the garden. And those wasps cleared the dahlia of thrip. They ate the thrip. I've never seen a more successful wasp nest, and I've never seen the thrip. The thrip just went, whoosh, gone. And then I had a lovely dahlia crop. Took about 2 weeks. It was amazing. And we've had wasps in the ground next to the dahlia patch ever since. Every summer they come and they just keep the dahlias clean. They eat all of the little nasties. They just munch. So we don't do anything, I'm afraid, to save ourselves from pests and disease. I think the fact that we are sort of the extreme opposite of a monoculture helps, because if something does get infested with black fly, I can leave it and they'll have something else to cut. And if something gets infested with black fly, then along will come the ladybirds to eat the black fly, and along will come something to eat the ladybirds, and so on and so on. And as a result, my mother-in-law moved in finally after lockdown. We converted a shed into her house. Poor granny. No, she's not living in a shed. It's a nice house that she now lives in, but she is really in the middle of the field, far away from the road, and she sits looking out of her window, and she says that she watches the food chain in motion, and she gets the barn owl at that end. And so we have long grass so that we have mice. If you have all your grasses cut, if it's very tidy, there's nowhere for the mice to live, and shrews, and then the birds of prey have nothing to eat, and so you won't get owls. And I think to have an owl is such a compliment from the owl. So that's how we do it, I'm afraid. And if anybody's thinking about, I mean, I'm a keen wild person, and I do appreciate people don't have enough room, and I completely get that, but we're lucky we've got the space, and so we don't have to worry about, I mean, there are slugs, but I don't worry about them. That's a really long answer to a short question.
Well, Anne actually agrees with you with in terms of wasps. She says they are great predators. So I've had a question about daffodils. Do you grow daffodils for bouquets?
I missed the narcissi completely. I grow narcissi because I grow scented or very heavy double daffs. I don't grow I don't grow bulbs which the Lincolnshire, I can buy the flowers off the Lincolnshire growers for less than it would cost me to buy the bulbs myself. So I grow super duper tulips and super duper narcissi. And because I have planned to have my garden flowering from the 1st of April to the 15th of November, I grow late narcissi. I'm not going to grow the early ones, because the early ones I get from my Cornish suppliers. But I do grow lots of, I love those sort of, I can't remember what any of them are called, but you know, the ones with the sort of apricot middles. I love them. And so, yes, I do have a couple of beds for them.
And a question
early in the season, so I don't have many of them.
A question again about your diary, which is good because that's why we're here. How do you manage to fit in consultations with brides around your scheduled diary?
Well, because I've got the schedule, I can see that I've got time. And but what I think more important is when I'm not going to have consultations with brides, and I never see anybody at the weekend because it's family time, and otherwise I don't see my kids. And with brides, what I tend to do is I'm quite ruthless, I'm afraid. So when I get the first call from somebody, I say, and they say, can I come and see you and talk about my wedding? And I say, I'll stop you right there. Could you send me as much information about your wedding as you can on an email? So, you know, everything from numbers of people to how many bridesmaids to where the venue is, whether the venue and whether the ceremony is happening somewhere else, you know, all of that information. And then depending on that information, I'll look at it and I'll first of all decide whether I'm going to do the wedding or not. And sometimes I say no. But quite often, if I'm going to do it, I'll then say, okay, and I go back to them with a ballpark figure. So we haven't even met at this stage, and I'll give them a ballpark figure. And then if the ballpark figure works, then we'll meet. But I don't meet everybody who rings up, because you'd never have any time to do anything. And quite often people just, you know, they really do just want, I mean, my favourite weddings are the ones where people want buckets and they want to do it themselves. Because those people, they've managed their expectations already. Whereas the ones where they ring up and say, they've got 350 of their closest friends coming in, so they've spent all their budget on champagne, can I do the flowers? I generally say no.
Yeah, do you know, I was just thinking actually, because I did the bucket thing with mine. We've got a florist to pick them out of the gardens, and Anyway, yeah, she must have thought as the easiest person alive, because I just went, yeah, whatever, I don't mind, just do what you want.
Yeah, well, and also that's lovely, you know, and then I think that's a much better thing than the minute people start spending really lots and lots of money on wedding flowers, then they have the absolute right to expect X, but then the job becomes much more complicated, because you have to spend a lot of time making sure you understand what X is. And they may have a really strong picture in their head, but they may not have the ability to describe that to you very effectively. So you then, you know, I mean, I'm just not a big fan of huge weddings, but that's my thing. That's what lockdown has really given me. Actually, COVID has really given me the opportunity to really reassess what we do. And I will, obviously, I've got quite a lot. I've got weddings. All this year's weddings have been postponed to next year, and I hope they happen. But after I've done those ones, I'm not doing big weddings anymore. I'm doing little weddings. I love little weddings.
So we've got, I just wanted to tell you these comments. This is just feedback from people. Sarah says that was really enjoyable. Thank you, Georgie. Someone's, Anne's put, such an inspiring talk. Thank you. Alice, thank you, Georgie. That was so interesting and informative. So, yeah, thank you very much for sharing such a, you know, your breadth of knowledge. It's been really interesting. I'm going to hand you to my colleague, who's just going to kind of close down the evening. But thank you, Georgie. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. See you all at a workshop at Common Farm. Have a look at our website and come and do cash flow forecasting. Then I'll really sort you all out.
Well, thank you very much, Georgie, and thank you, Debbie. And if there's anything we can do through Tyfu Cymru, through the project, to help with anything further, you know, please do get in touch with us. And thank you for joining us tonight. And I hope you've all enjoyed, which I'm sure you all have. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.